Hey, all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about Dragon Age and its lore. I am one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup.
And I'm Shelby, also known as Shecup.
And we are here again this month for our patron chat. And we've got some lovely patrons here with us. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves in the order of my screen. So first we have LVCC13.
Hello, everyone.
And then we've got the Crimson Knight.
Hello.
And then the one, the only, Polkashins.
Hello. I am very excited for tonight's topic.
Yeah. So, Shelby, why don't you give us a breakdown of the topic?
Yeah, sure thing. So we are going back to a topic we've discussed before at length, and we're talking about spirits and demons, but not in the way you might expect. I think the last time we talked about this on a patron chat, we were talking about what demon we would be most susceptible to. But today we are going to be talking about if we could come up with one spirit and one, its corresponding demon to add to the canon, what would that one demon and spirit be? So what emotions would you make into a spirit and a demon? And of course, I do have a list. I brought a list of the spirits and demons that we have seen in the games so far. I guess games and books and comics. So we've seen spirits of command, compassion, faith, hope, justice, love, technically kind of iffy on that one. Purpose, valor, wisdom, honor, courage, and I think learning maybe is one we've seen too. And then for demons, we've seen desire, despair, envy, fear, hunger, pride, rage, sloth, and terror demons. So those are the ones that we've seen so far in the canon. So the question today is, what emotion, positive and negative, would you add to the canon to create a spirit and a demon? And if we have time at the end, or maybe in the second half, we can talk about what emotion we absolutely would not want added as a spirit and a demon. So who wants to go first?
I guess I'll go first. So the spirit that I've thought of to add to the canon is the spirit of joy. Something that can help fill people with, of course, joy and laughter and just all of those feelings. And the demon that I've corresponded to it is grief. I mean, it's the kind of the polar opposite. And of course, when people give in to their griefs, they're capable of making very bad decisions. And I think it could also be a demon that could potentially corrupt people into abominations if they give into it enough.
So my answer kind of goes off of yours, Stevens, because my answer for spirit is grief. And I don't actually think grief is a negative emotion. I think it's good. And I think it's something that in Western culture, we don't like and we don't want to acknowledge, or we put a time limit on it and say, okay, well, you should be done grieving a month after, your parent dies or whomever. And I think that's when it has the potential to turn into like an abomination, into something negative. So I am kind of headcanoning this canon entry as a spirit of grief, but the society, the culture in Thetis does not have those kind of time limits on what grief looks like. So grief and the grieving process is a healthy thing. And the spirit of grief can come alongside you and help you in that process. And the demon that would be kind of attached to that for me is, I think, apathy. Because to me, and I don't remember the exact quote, but in the WandaVision TV show, it basically talks about how grief is proof that you loved on this earth while you were here. And so to me, the whole entire opposite of that idea is apathy, and is apathetic, being apathetic. You would not care if you weren't affected by the love of people that surrounded you. So to me, apathy is the demon that corresponds to grief. So that's my answer.
I love all of those answers. And I want to add on to it. I think possibly, perhaps, if grief or if joy is the spirit, perhaps the demon is mania. I think that's an interesting take for that. But I also think with grief as the spirit, perhaps bitterness might be the demon. But I think like grief is such a complicated emotion that I think that it could go so many different directions.
I think I can definitely see both of your all's points of grief on a continuum, and it should have like positives and negatives to it, that it could be both a spirit and a demon in different forms and not even necessarily the opposites of each other. I love joy as a spirit, and I'm honestly really shocked that we don't have anything closer to that, because I think like the idea, like there's an idea of like all of the emotions can be boiled down to just like a few. I think it's like 5 core emotions, and then everything else is like combinations thereof. But joy is one of like the core emotions, and it never registered in my head of like, we don't have that. But I also really, really like the idea of like it, just the same way grief can be on a continuum of like joy and then mania, at like just mania being like, when you are experiencing it, it can, not always, but it can feel positive in the moment, even though it really isn't. And I think that's something like everything else has been so overtly negative in like the demon influences that we've seen so far. That's a really interesting idea.
Well, Lizzie, do you want to go next, since I think you maybe had something to say about joy too?
Yeah, I had initially picked joy for my spirit, and I actually think that the opposite of joy would be mania or hysteria, like Cash was saying. But I also kind of wonder if instead of joy, like we already know love is sort of a spirit. What if the opposite of love was obsession, an obsession demon? I feel like that's a lot more dangerous. An obsessive love is a much more dangerous emotion and attitude than a love that actually cares about someone else. Huge difference between love and obsession. I feel like a demon would hook onto that real quick.
I really love that you didn't say lust, because I think that we sometimes associate lust a lot, and like the idea of like a physical expression of love is often like lowered in that, but like I like obsession as the opposite of love. I once said in the podcast the opposite of love is regret, which is why there's a regret demon in Solas's chamber. Shelby didn't like that one. She told me to shut up.
I think that the demon of regret, I don't know. I do, because I do feel like Solas truly does love the Inquisitor, especially if he's in a relationship with her. So I guess I just don't feel like that's fair to soulless Mancers, is why that's my reaction to you, Austin.
Soulless
Liz,
Mancers say all the time that they want pain and sorrow. So I'm giving you more pain, you know?
Well, I actually came up with a thought of what I thought the spirit of associated with the demon of regret would be, and I think that it would be content, because like when you're content, like you have no regrets, like, and I think we see in the game that Solus is not content with what he did, which yes, or acceptance would be a good one too. And like he couldn't get over what he did in the past, so he had to. So that's why the demon of regret appeared in his realm.
I like that. I like that one a lot.
Liz, I have a question for you about your ideas for obsession as a demon, because I think they are distinct, but there's an interplay between the two. But your thoughts on like the interplay between obsession and envy?
Oh, that's a good point. But I think with an envy demon, envy is wanting what someone else has. You can have an element of obsession with that, but it's still more about wanting to take from them rather than possessing them. Obsession is you want to possess that person or that thing. I mean, we're all obsessed with Dragon Age. We all want to possess all of this. We are all infected by this demon, but it's very much of thing of I want that person or that thing, not I want that because someone else has it. At least in my brain.
No, that makes total sense to me too, and that's kind of where my head was at, because it's like I think envy can be both. It can be a negative emotion, like there can be hate in envy, and it's not so much of like I want that for myself, but it's like I also kind of like I don't necessarily want you to have it, or if you do have it, then I also want it, but I want mine to be better. Whereas I think it's more about the possessor, and I think because like the envy demon takes on the form of their target eventually, and then moves on to the next target. Whereas I think with possession, in my mind, and along your points, it's like you don't necessarily want to become that thing or that person. It's just you want everything about that person, like in your life and always present, but still having your own kind of distinct identity from it. I guess I will go next. My spirit, my emotion is catharsis. Which I kind of struggle with this for a little bit, because I felt like catharsis could be argued as more of an emotional process rather than an emotion itself. But I do think it is intensely emotional, and I think it is so unique that there's not really anything else there's no real good comparisons to it. The best that release of tension and stress, and finally processing something, coming to terms with something. The best encapsulation of it that I can think of is that moment in Inside Out when Riley gets home after running away, and she immediately like dives into her parents' arms and starts bawling, and they're like, "It's okay, we love you, we're so glad you're home." And then she lets out that sigh of relief, and you tell she just instantly feels better. I initially kind of thought of the opposite, the demon of catharsis. Mama and I kind of thought of it a little bit as depression, but I felt like that is too close to despair, which we already have. But instead, and I'll give the cups credit for this because they put me onto this idea, but instead of depression, but just repression. And so I was trying to think of like what that would be like as a demon. And I think it would almost be more of like you are making yourself void of all emotion. And it's like, I'm not going to allow myself to feel anything to avoid the pain of whatever this stressor in my life is. And then the demon would just feed off of those repressed emotions, that potential energy that you are not releasing. And I think for me, both of these ideas are these emotions are like very powerful emotions that like out of a lot of things, like I would not want to run into a depression demon, but I also feel like catharsis can be such an intense emotion that like if you're not ready to experience that, just randomly running into that like in the fade would probably rock your world if you weren't ready.
I'm now very intrigued by the idea of a demon of emptiness that both fascinates me and terrifies me. Because like the concept of nothing is actually very terrifying.
And we know it might kind of exist a little bit in that universe because that's what Sarah is afraid of. If you read her gravestone in the Fade, that the nothing is what she's afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there's the whole lore behind the void, which we don't know a ton about, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a possibility for sure. Austin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can do that. So my spirit is a spirit of nostalgia. Um, and I got a really clever thing. Like I want it to appear like in the new game, but it has to have the graphics of DAO. But I don't. I've been trying to think of like because nostalgia is kind of like grief, like a double-edged sword. Like it can be really great, or it can be really bad. And I was trying to rack of like what I think its demon's opposite is, and I just came up with the demon of gatekeeping. But
You could also do the demon of toxic positivity.
that's also probably true. Or even I thought about like the demon of denial, because sometimes nostalgia leads you to denial of like what like the problems that often were around that time or other things like that. Like even if we all love Dragon Age Origins, but there are some problematic things that happen in that game. But I just love the idea
Incorrect.
of showing up and like getting like seeing this demon just totally in like some random NPC from DAO. That's hilarious to me.
I also was thinking about because, you know, we have a pride demon, obviously, but I think pride is another one of those emotions that it's like, yes, it can be taken to the negative. It can turn into arrogance and conceitedness and like take it to a really terrible extreme, but also it's June and we can be prideful and, you know, proud of who we are as individuals. So to me it's like this is another one that could go either way. So I'm thinking about what a spirit of pride would look like and what its demon would be like. And I know I mentioned toxic positivity earlier, but I think if pride was a spirit, toxic positivity could potentially be its demon.
I almost wonder if they've kind of mislabeled pride demons because of that. Should it maybe have been arrogance instead of pride?
Mhm.
Hubris
Yeah.
too.
Hubris. Yeah. I mean, there is a pride demon in the game that we meet that's called hubris. So absolutely.
Because I think of like pride, and in my mind, really the opposite of pride more so is like humility. And the pride can be there can be a lot of overwhelming negative qualities to it. And I definitely get your point about like there are things that you should feel good about and that you should take pride in. But I think of it, I kind of think two lines of thoughts here. First, to stick on pride, I think that you can differentiate between those negative aspects and then also just like I don't know the right emotion for this, but just recognizing the actual value of something. You know, if you're a badass, and if you're awesome, like if you're great at your job, you're not being proud to say I'm great at my job. It's just it would be inaccurate or misleading or wrong, or maybe even a negative emotion conceited to be like, oh no, I'm awful at my job, like I'm not good. Yeah, self-awareness, thank you, Liz. Just that the actual self-awareness, both of yourself and of your environment and of other people, to recognize like the true value of something. And it can be negative to underplay something for your own benefit. But I also, because we keep talking about it, like it's came up with grief, it's came up with love, and now with pride, of like the I think a very interesting way, if they wanted to move into this, of like a lot of these emotions, and they kind of are, but like existing on a continuum, because some of the things we're talking about here, like that already exist in the game, they're not. It's not exactly a continuum. It's more polar opposites, but there's not a whole lot like right in the middle of it. Like fear and courage, or fear, terror and valor. Like they're polar opposites, but there's nothing in between there. Whereas like there's a lot in between, the positive and the negative of grief, the positive and negative of pride.
That's actually something I really hope we see more of in Dreadwolf, is instead of just like you said, just all the emotions being on the spectrum, it would be so much more interesting if we're interacting with spirits and literally one dialogue choice could turn them into a raging demon that destroys half of the room that we're in. That would be so much more interesting.
Ooh, on that, now I have another thought. What if, and if they went this direction, what if there was, and on this spectrum, on this continuum, like there's a center point, and what if like a lot of like the spirits and the demons, or all of them, like they used to have, their center somewhere on their continuum, on their spectrum, and then they have just lost it to where now they can only exist on the polar ends, and then they don't ever feel like they're complete or they're whole, because they only exist at the polar ends and not in the center, where they can encompass both aspects of it in equal measure.
That's an interesting thought, mainly because the Chantry teaches us that they're all bad. I know we all roll our eyes at the Chantry, me included, like, burn it down, take it down. I'm all on that page, but the Chantry has to have some kind of truth to its teachings, at least a little bit. And so they have a caution against all spirits, and maybe because like the kind of like what Cash says, like the spirit's inability to live in the gray is what leads them to be corrupted. Because Solus tells us that the spirits that turn into demons are spirits that have had their purpose corrupted. Like in his companion quest, you go, and the spirit of wisdom has been corrupted against its purpose, forced into violence, and it turns into a pride demon. And so what if that's part of it, is their inability to live in the gray and complexity of emotion is what causes them to shift between these.
It's weird to think about, because it would kind of turn everything that happened with Cole's companion quest a little bit more on its head. Because what if we actually didn't make him more human by helping him be able to see the shades of gray? What if we just helped him find his center then? There's so many places they could take it. I'm excited to see where it all goes next.
I'm also terrified to see where it goes next.
Very scary potential. Would now be a good time for a mid break, Austin?
I think so.
Ah, Hawk stepped in the poopy.
I love you.
Want a sandwich?
All this for me. And I didn't get Alexius anything.
Send him a fruit basket. Everyone loves those.
All right, well, welcome to the middle of the show, and I was late on that because I was waiting for the sounds, because that's what happens on the Holocron History podcast. But this is not the Holocron Histories podcast. So, But anyway, welcome to the middle of the show where we talk about all things that have to do with the podcast, but not lore about Dragon Age. And so here we thank our patrons. So thank you to all of you who are here. Thank you to all our patrons who support us. A special thank you to our first patrons, Genesis and Lisa M. A special thank you to our Divine Tier patron, Kit. And a very, very special thank you to our Nug Tier, our Nug King patron, Lewis H. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you would like to support us and come on these chats, you can go to patreon.com/DALorecast and sign up there and sign up for our $20 a month tier and come and join us on these awesome chats that we have every month. You can also come and support us on Apple or Spotify by leaving ratings and reviews. And you can leave a review with 5 stars on Apple, and we will read it out on a future episode of the show. And you can also leave us a comment, a kind comment on Spotify, and we will read it out on the future episode of the show as well. And Shelby, are we caught up, or do we have another one to read?
No, I do have another one to read. We have a few more. So this one is from Eris, and they said on the War of the Lions episode, they said, if Divine Nightingale says it's over for you, I'm going to go ahead and say it's a wrap. There's not many people I trust, but Liliana has always been one of them. Goodbye, Celine. Totally agree.
Truth. Yeah. Not a Celine fan on this podcast. I don't think so. But anyway, thank you for that comment. And if you leave some comments, we will read them out on the future episode of the show. You can also come and hang out with all of us here on Discord. We're on the Cups Podcasting and More Discord server, and you can join that and hang out with all of us. Talk about Dragon Age, talk about our other shows, talk about any game you want to talk about anything that's coming out. Come and share with us in our hilarious memes, our adorable pets, and our wonderful video game discussions. And other than that, I think that's all I have for the mid-break.
Okay, well, let's get back to it.
Up there, giant icicle tits. Tittles.
You're looking for titsicles.
Oh, that's good.
Yes, and it's a real nice night for an evening.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
So I thought on the second half, because I knew that conversation wouldn't take too long, but I kind of thought we could talk about what spirit, demon, either side, what emotion you absolutely would not want them to add into the games.
Honestly, I think that's a harder question because I look at it from a storytelling perspective of, ooh, this could make a really, really interesting demon or spirit to encounter because storyline. But honestly, I don't think that a spirit of greed or avarice would be very interesting. It's been done. It's been done too many times. I don't really see an interesting spin on it when it's already kind of associated with so many other demons like the envy demon and things like that. I can't see that being fun at this point.
I think because I was originally thinking about like the demon of pride rather than being like a demon of narcissism, but then I thought about like the conversations around mental health, and I think there's a lot of those emotions that they might do, like a demon of anxiety that might actually like get coded and be really problematic when it comes across as the conversation around mental health. So I think that while I wouldn't be necessarily against those emotions getting added, I think that I don't trust BioWare to do it well.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think all of the emotions that are like affiliated with personality disorders, mood disorders, anything like anxiety, depression, even mania to me is borderline. Like any of those is just, we just need to stay away from that because I think even if BioWare does do a really good job and BioWare like doesn't do anything problematic, which is a high bar for them, even if that was true, there's just so much potential for people to twist it and make it harmful. And so to me, it's like, I'm not sure that the harm is worth it.
Right. And I think that along those lines, there's so much potential, especially since in the lore, demons are embodiments of evil. And so it's really easy to take that and take it and say, oh, those with mental health, you really are like evil.
I definitely agree with the fear that BioWare won't treat some of these more sensitive topics with the due weight that they deserve. And the thing that like I would least want them to put in the game is, and along these lines, is depression. But I also feel like despair is like the closest thing to it right now. And I think they even say in there that like, if you have a despair demon that like isn't being super overt and it's kind of just exerting its influences on a given area, like the people there are going to develop depression and other things, which I don't really exactly like, because I think of despair being more of like, insular moments and discrete moments rather than a long-term episode. I think like in terms of communicating a message of like, oh, people who experience these emotions, like you all are evil. And I could definitely see somebody going about like a developers going about those things in that way and potentially unintentionally conveying those messages. But I also think that like a better way to handle it, if they were going to approach it, is to be like, these are distinct emotions, and especially some of the worst ones, like especially something like anxiety that doesn't really fit the moment, or depression just in general and in and of itself. Like, grief can be healthy, but eventually it can grow into depression. And it's more like these emotions, while they are real and they may feel them, they are also distinct from the person, and they don't define the person, and you are not this emotion. And like, if you are inhabited by a demon of depression, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are evil, which we don't see that if you're possessed by like a demon of sloth, for example. But I could see a ham-fisted approach unintentionally conveying that message.
I think that's part of the problem with how old Dragon Age Origins is. I mean, I love Dragon Age Origins. One of my favorite games. Great storyline. Loved everything about it. But look at how old the game is and where we were with talking about mental health when it was developed. If they were starting from scratch completely now, taking that original story idea, I guarantee you the way that demons and spirits work in Dragon Age would be completely different.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I don't necessarily think that the way it's set up now is harmful, but I do think it is a little bit reductive to look at emotions in this way. So it is important for us to remember, like, this is just a lens that we're looking at it. This is not how emotions really work in real life. Like, this is just an exercise to all those who are listening out there. But one that I would hate for them to add, actually I have two that I would hate for them to add. First is gluttony. I just feel like too much potential for harmfulness again. But then the other one is like pain or agony or hurt or anything like that. To me, again, Lizzie, to your point, it's overdone. Like, we've seen that before. We know what this looks like. Go watch any horror movie. Like, we know what that looks like. So for me, that's one that I'm like, this is not compelling. This is not interesting to me. Let's just skip that one.
Been there, done that, got all the Scream t-shirts.
Honestly, now that I think about it, I'm kind of shocked that we didn't get a gluttony demon even as early as DAO, just since it's like, with DAO, they kind of went in with like, oh, here are the 7 deadly sins. And it's like, looking back now, I'm like, gluttony is not on there? Isn't that, well,
I know, right?
I guess they could argue that like the demon of hunger could be gluttony, and they just try to make it a little bit better because, like, if I'm remembering correctly, like a demon of hunger, it's not just food. It's like it's like a ravenous emptiness in your soul that you want to fill up with literally, if you have one particular taste, fill it up with that, or you'll search around looking for anything that might fill up that hole.
Hunger demons are the desire demon's ugly cousin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is a lot of similarities too. And frankly, honestly, like that's what gluttony is too, from the perspective of like the 7 deadly sins. Like it's not just food. And so to me, it's just like they just completely just slapped a different name on it and said, all right, we're good to go. Let's do this. Like they weren't really that creative with that one.
And I think from like the 7 deadly sins perspective, like gluttony is so rooted, like Shelby said, in selfishness. And wastefulness, that those are probably the demons that I would associate with gluttony, selfishness, and wastefulness.
Which I think that is much more compelling to me, of like somehow of the idea of like you're wasting resources that other people need, however you want to phrase that as a demon. Mm-hmm. That's much more compelling to me than gluttony or whatever else.
Like, when I picture gluttony, this is honestly what I picture, and I'm about to trigger the entire internet by saying this, but I think of the scene in Lord of the Rings with the tomato. And but I think about that Denethor is sitting there and he's stuffing his face while his son and everyone else rides out to die and just trying to defend from evil. And that's what I view when gluttony is: selfishness, wastefulness, things like that.
I think of billionaires now, and because I completely agree with you all, and honestly, I think if we are going to distinguish hunger from gluttony, I'm not going to, I promise. I like this distinction of, if hunger is more of like a ravenous void in you that you don't know how to fill because you're just so discontent with your life, versus gluttony being more of like a consumption just for consumption's sake, right? Like it's not a void, it's more just I want because I want it. And I think in terms of like, a billionaire, nobody should ever be a billionaire. If there are any billionaires listening, well, first off, give everyone on our Discord a bunch of money. But also give away your money. You don't need $1 billion. Nobody needs $1 billion. If you have $1 billion, that is gluttonous in my mind. You are never going to be able to spend all of it in your life. And that's the same thing to me as like, a medieval king sitting down at like a 50-foot long banquet table filled with food, and he's the only one there, and he's like, well, I'm going to eat this until I, pop all the buttons off of my shirt and my pants, and then give all the rest of it to the dogs. Like, nobody else can have this. Nobody.
Yeah. Like even when there are poor people sitting outside the king's castle, like, yes, I completely agree with that.
The history nerd in me wants to kind of argue about that a little bit. I'm not going to lie. So most of the time, and I could be wrong about this because I haven't done a huge amount of studying into this, but most of the time, the king's not sitting alone in his castle. He's surrounded by like 50 to 300 other people, depending on the kingdom. He's feeding all of his court. He's not just sitting there by himself. So most of that food is being eaten by, yes, the wealthy elite who should be sharing more, but it's very much a social thing. And a lot of that food did get donated or given to people at the end of all of that. But yes, that is totally the most obscene example that could be said on this podcast because of the ratings.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, just an example. I had another one, but I forgot what it was.
Steven, you got any crazy thoughts for us?
Not necessarily.
Oh, I remembered my other one. The other one that I would not want them to add is neglect. While I do think they could tell a compelling story with that, I think it's just it would be too harmful to people who have experienced neglect and abuse at the hands, especially of their parents. So that would be another one I wouldn't want to see.
We've got enough potential landmines with being set into winter at the beginning of this game. Men need to be cautious.
Yeah.
You know what? If BioWare really wanted to troll us, they would have demons of obsession forcing people to like pore over books and like talk about all their conspiracy theories and talking about how their idea of romance is the best. If BioWare really wanted to troll us, they would do that.
Can they do it with swords and shields, please? Can they? That would just make it cherry on top.
I think Cash likes that idea.
Cash is having a reaction.
Oh my God. I would die. Oh, that's an amazing idea. They absolutely have to do that. Somebody sent this recording to BioWare.
I think they listened, so they got it anyways.
Well, then can we tell them to write swords and shields anyway? Because I want to read it. If it's half as bad as Varric says it is, then it's going to be the most excellent and amazing thing ever.
Does anybody else have anything they want to add before we kind of wrap it up for tonight?
All right. Well, I'll let you all go and kind of tell people where they can find you, and then we'll wrap up. And so we'll start with LVCC13.
So you can normally find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/LVCC13, but I have a social life now, so I haven't been streaming lately. And it's been weird, guys. It's so weird actually having people with the same schedule as me, and I can go out and do stuff.
All right. Then we'll go with Steven or Crimson Knight.
Hey, I'm just on Discord as Crimson Knight, and that's where you can find me.
All right. And then Kolka Sheds.
I am very much a internet wallflower who does not like being observed by strangers except for Discord. So come join the Cups Discord, especially if you have $1 billion. Please give us all some money. Yes, thank you. Please, I'll DM you my Venmo. Thanks. Bye.
Pay off the student loans. Pay off the student loans.
Anyway, well, before we wrap up, I do have a special thank you to our Nug King patron, Lewis H., who gets thanked at the end of every show. And also, thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.
Have you ever wanted to deep dive into the lore and stories behind all your favorite Marvel movies? Then do we have the show for you? I'm Captain Shenko.
And I'm Psych88. Join us as we dissect the media megalith that is the MCU. We'll talk about the origin stories, the fights, and everything in between.
The MCU Lorecast releases on all major podcasting platforms on Mondays as part of the Robots Radio Rocket Club and can be found on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.